What's up, everybody? This is Mr. Deadly here, and for this video I'll be discussing the controversial bannings that happened very recently in regards to Dockside Extortionist, Crypt, Nadu, and Jeweled Lotus in the Commander format. Definitely came as a surprise to mostly everyone. And whatever agreement or disagreement you have with the decision, whether you're a fan of the choice to ban these cards for the overall health of the format, and if you didn't really use those cards anyways, it might not be too relevant to you. Or if you had a collection of copies of these cards and took a loss financially and also enjoyed playing these banned cards in the Commando format at a higher power. Both sides, I would say, have valid arguments to be made. And for this video, I will try to understand and reason with the decision, try to see both perspectives, and ultimately I will also tell you my own sort of thoughts on the final result. I will say, if you're looking for a yay, Casual Commandos back baby video, that will not be this video. It's going to be more of a review, be critical as well, and I will certainly disagree with some of the reasoning throughout. We will take a look at the news article and sort of go through that just to better understand. Because a lot of people, as of now, that are frustrated, upset, confused, shocked, and I think rightfully so, because this is a huge decision that was very random timing when it comes to. There was no warning ahead of time, and I think that would have been more of a better outcome if we had some sort of heads up, like, hey, if there's a watch list essentially of these cards, and we already knew that they might be on the chopping block. Like, if it's on a list and they're being reviewed, I think this news would not be as surprising, and people would be more prepared and perhaps not view these high-end pieces of cardboard, value-wise, as more of a game piece as opposed to a collectible. And I think that's what's so upsetting about this for some people, is because, you would think in your mind, since these cards are being promoted basically to the very end of this banning in sets and with different treatments as a highlights, a chase card where people will have actively went and tried to pull a Crypt, for example, in Caverns of Ixalan, and then only in the end for it to be relatively meaningless, which I can see the frustration. For me personally, I didn't really have too many copies of any of the banned cards. I did recently acquire a Crypt through my LGS, where I built up credit and eventually was able to pay for one. So it was a disappointment in that sense. I was excited, and then all of a sudden, I can't even use the card in Commander as of now. But I will say, overall, if you talk about just the health of the format, there's certainly cards that have been banned in this very instance that I think definitely was the right decision, just not the right way to go about it. And now let's get into the actual news article itself. So it was announced September 23rd, 2024 by the Commander Rules Committee. Now with this whole announcement, another issue I had is I think there was a total of 5 people in the Commander Rules Committee that ultimately voted on each card, and I don't think they necessarily factored in the Commander Advisory Group, from what I heard, which would have provided even more perspective and reasoning, and perhaps this could have been avoided. Such a catastrophic event like this in Magic's history that we haven't really seen before when it comes to the banning of cards. And all these happened all at once, which makes it even worse. So if you have a multitude of all of these different cards, you just take such a huge loss value-wise. Not just the player, but also any store, vendor that would actually buy these cards to resell them. Perhaps they had already a relatively large stock that were being promoted and sold, and now they essentially, this decision took that high-end cardboard at the time we all thought would most likely never change, and lit it on fire and made it actual cardboard, relatively worthless. So it is definitely an interesting decision. And I just wanted to also point out, going back to the Commander's Rule Committee, I think, when there's only so little people, like when it comes to the amount, 5, that makes such a big decision that changes not only the gameplay itself, but also more so the financial aspect. In my opinion, what would have been a better approach with any sort of rule or topic or policy change, like in politics, for example, I think it would have been nice if they actually polled the audience and said, hey, we're thinking about banning Mana Crypt for these reasons, and we just want to know yes or no, do you agree? I think that would have gauged the audience better. And even if the vote was like 50-50, then at least people would be more, would expect this banning, as opposed to just waking up one day and losing out on the value, the excitement they had for these cards. So let's get into the Commander Rules Committee explanation of bans. It reads, the philosophy of Commander prioritizes creativity, and one of the ways we have historically reflected that in the rules and the ban list is to encourage a slow pace of game play than traditional formats. This gives time and space to develop and do different things. So yeah, I think what they're trying to point out here is the creativity aspect, meaning they don't want to have people's decks that consist of the same cards, like staples, and then you run into more of a play pattern as opposed to a diverse environment where people can kind of expand their design space and not feel like they need to play certain cards. So then it says it encourages a slow-paced game, which Commander is in general. I mean, it's a 4-player, 40 life. So, I mean, unless you're doing like an infinite combo, it will generally take up like an hour at least just to finish a game. And, that, I think that definitely factors in with the power level, maybe, but ultimately, you can always just talk Rule 0 and see how strong someone's deck is. To an extent, it's never really that accurate. And I think that's why they want to try to moderate and control the format more in their eyes. But at the same time, if you make it too slow of a game, like a slugfest, where there's a ton of board wipes and no one's really generating much of a value engine, that could be just as unfun, because you just sort of want the game to end after 2 to 3 hours of just sitting around in relatively frustration. So there's pros and cons to that, lowering the power level, that is. So then it says Commander is more like a casual format, a social format is what they're trying to get at. So the whole casual argument, where they want new players to sort of, new and existing, to sort of all sit down and, enjoy the game, have fun. And I think that's what we all want for the most part, depending on how your play style is to sort of be more chill and not have as many quick games where the opponents essentially don't feel like they're involved. But I will say, I know they're trying to eliminate fast mana because that just accelerates everything. But there's definitely some major disagreements I have with that. And we'll get into it once I start discussing the individual cards. But just most notably, when they say they want to slow down the format and create more of a better social experience, I wouldn't say that fast mana is the reason that a game is miserable or not. In my estimation, the deck strategy, the commander itself, and all the cards that are now pushed in the format by WotC's designers to draw interest and create high value cards that in some cases end up being banned. Because when you think of other sort of notable cards that are broken, I don't think why this specific fast mana is the only sort of issue. I think there's many other cards you can go with. Do I want to play against stacks, for example? Is that fun? I don't think so. A deck that counters all my spells, or a deck that has mass land destruction, or if I play an island turn 1 and then tap it for a Soul Ring, and then, which we'll get into, is still legal, which is an interesting decision, and then I play a Rhystic Study turn 2, and then a few turns later that player has 10 to 15 cards in hand, I have 6. Is that fair? So I guess my point I'm trying to make is the Commander format, there's a lot of variance to it. So to say that fast mana is the sole reason or just the main reason that's ban worthy to get rid of from the game seems like a more of a linear viewpoint, because a lot of it is very much deck dependent, player design aspect when it comes to what you as a player enjoy the most from the game, and that's when it comes to just the commander experience. So as you walk into an LGS, what you're really sort of discovering over the years as you play is the theme, the power level, the people that you want to surround yourself with the most, that you get the most enjoyment from, both from a gameplay perspective and a friendship. And I would say with that deck building journey that you go on, you will go through games where it is miserable. There is certain themes that will be unfun. Even just simply having a game where all the creatures constantly get destroyed. But that's how you sort of adapt as a deck builder. Again, that's how you find a play group that you prefer when it comes to casual or just power level in general. And that's ultimately how you sort of decide that. So essentially what these bannings are doing is they're sort of skipping over that step and saying, hey, these cards are toxic for everyone and deserve to be banished into the Shadow Realm, exiled. Let's get into the cards themselves. First up, we have Mana Crypt. Coming down for no mana on turn 1, it's quite possible to have the explosive start of Mana Crypt into Signet or Talisman land and another Signet, leaving that player untapping 5 mana on turn 2. So that's the main issue they're getting at, is untapping 5 mana on turn 2, which is a very explosive start. And in their eyes, it really throws off the game flow. But I do want to highlight, just like when they say the word possible, anything is possible in Commander. There's so much nonsense that happens, so much ridiculous value. And, just because they start off quick doesn't necessarily mean that they will end the game quick. It's very deck dependent, and how they constructed it. It's very card dependent. It's a singleton format, so you're not always going to get your ultimate best hand of 7 at the beginning of the game. to ban a card for a play pattern that isn't always necessarily common is, again, interesting, I will say. And then it goes on to saying, in games over 12 turns, the accumulated threat of damage from Mana Crypt provides a reasonable counterbalance for its explosive effect. But when you are snowballing to a turn 6 to 8 win, it's meaningless drawback. So again, this heightens my sort of point of it being such a high variance game, and I think when it comes to like 6 to 8 turn win, that depends on the players, the opponent's ability to respond. I mean, I am Mr. Deadly. I like to try to play some removal in my decks, just try to stop the player from winning. That's sort of the idea. And then the arch enemy develops and everyone teams up against that player who is popping off first. So even if you pop off first, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the best strategy, because I've seen it at times where the person gets targeted by other players and stopped, and the resources are drained from different aspects of removal and life damage. And all of a sudden, player number 2 or 3 start to develop their engine, and no one really has anything to stop them with since it was all used on player 1, and then they end up winning the game. That's typically my style of play, is I like to sit back, watch how things unfold, build up a little engine, and then respond when needed, but then ultimately try to avoid myself being the target until it's too late and I go swoop in for the victory. That's my whole kind of strategy when it comes to most decks. I don't like to sort of snowball, because you could win some of those games, but you won't necessarily win them all, and you'll develop a reputation of having a strong play pattern, and eyes will be gravitate towards your forward state more often. So to say that Mana Crypt creates a turn 6 to 8 win enough times for it to be ban worthy, I'm not sure how they can get that statistic. It's nearly impossible. So that is one pushback I have. Another one is that since Mana Crypt is around $190 when it comes to the price, in a sense that they're acting like these cards are seen often at the table. Like it's such a huge issue, similar to Soul Ring, where people will just abuse this card, and we need to sort of get it out of our system, get it out of the format before it starts to turn away players and create more of a competitive format, as opposed to when they preach that Commander is casual and they would like to go back to more slower pace. But I will say, with the Mana Crypt being so highly priced, I don't see it too often at my LGS in pods that I play. I've been playing Commander for over 8 years, so I'm very well experienced, and I haven't really played Mana Crypt myself. I just acquired one, like I said, but I didn't have really plans for it. I just wanted to sort of say, hey, I got one, mission accomplished. But to say that I see it often is not the case. It doesn't really affect my mindset in Commander as a whole. I still very much enjoy the game. There's tons of other toxic things that I very much dislike instead of Mana Crypt. And a lot of it comes down to the strength of the Commander itself. So I don't know, I guess in their eyes, based on their data, their research, and they think Mana Crypt was a well-known, well-played card that seemingly too many people abused, but I just didn't see it that way. And then occasionally you get the player that does want to be a quote-unquote try-hard, they're stopped, and then they end up dying to their own Mana Crypt over time, and that's always a funny moment. But we'll get to the next card now. We have Jeweled Lotus. So Jeweled Lotus was a Commander-specific card that was printed. So in that sense, you know, it becomes literally worth nothing because you can't play it anywhere else. It reads sack it at 3 mana only to cast your commander. So, well, there's no commander anymore to cast. This was another chase card that WotC did promote in different sets, pretty recent sets that is, and people were excited to pull it. They spent resources to try to get that card, and that's what makes it such a feel bad in the end, you know, when it comes to the financial aspect. Because sure, maybe not everyone had many copies of the card, and maybe you lost, you know, hundreds, perhaps a couple thousand max, but that doesn't factor in all the effort when it comes to actually buying sealed product, when it comes to opening packs to find something of value that you can recoup your purchase on. That's one aspect of the game. It's not just a game piece. So you can say, well, these are game pieces. You know, you shouldn't really put all your eggs in one basket. You shouldn't really rely on these as anything that has any meaning, worth anything, that is. But at the end of the day, they're not just game pieces. They are collectible. Wizards makes that very clear. And the reason they do is we see the prices of sealed product nowadays. It's to the moon. It's very pricey, and the only way they can justify that to an extent is to put in these high value chase cards with these fancy arts to get players to even purchase it in the hopes that they can recoup their value. So with these bannings, it certainly hinders that belief. I would say at least for now. It may eventually be a thing of the past, but it's definitely harder to trust the marketplace when such a big shift like this could happen again in the future. So now going back to Jeweled Lotus, you know, to me, yes, it certainly is very explosive. Certainly never should have been printed in general. I'm sure the WotC designers can also say that there was a mistake. But again, it is just a one-time use. So that's what I kind of want to emphasize here, is that with Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, you can untap with it and get value throughout the game. Jeweled Lotus, yes, you'll be able to get your commander out, probably turn 2 or 3, depending on the amount of mana it costs, or even 1, I guess. Similar effect to Mana Crypt, where you don't really see it too often. It's more of a CDH staple, because again, when it comes to Commander, most players believe in the casual mindset. It's certainly, I think there's more people like that as opposed to those that just strictly want to win the game as quick as possible and make their deck as optimized as they can. And for those players that do, I think that's perfectly reasonable, and I do apologize. I guess the rules committee thinks otherwise and prefers to just group us all together as filthy casuals, I suppose. But you know, it is a little frustrating when it comes to just the weighing the impact from a gameplay and a real world perspective. You know, is these bannings really improve the format for a majority of the people, for a majority of the games that you play? For me personally, again, I haven't really experienced these cards much against my opponents. And I think there's no denying that these cards certainly have a argument to be made, right, for the bannings. And I think a lot of people think that it's overall it may be healthier for the format. But I still go back to that idea of just building your own philosophy, having that ability to do so, and then finding others that align with that mindset, that strategy, that power level, as opposed to sort of forcing everyone into one aisle and affecting people's lives financially as well. Seems like it's just a very brutal way to go about it, in a sense. Okay, so now let's get on to the other card. We're not going to talk about Nadu much. Nadu is, as far as I'm concerned, can fly off. That guy was absolutely busted. No one enjoyed playing that bird. Very miserable experience. A very similar place pattern each game, and the solitaire theme. So I don't think there was many complaints with that creature. Dockside is I would say the next one that was less shocking when it comes to the decision. You know, it was printed back in 2019, and from the moment it started being played, I mean, I think anyone could have realized that this card is extremely busted for 2 mana. It would essentially, you could go from doing nothing and then have 15 to 20 treasures, and then you copy Dockside, bounce it, and then at that point it just like didn't really feel great to play it. You know, it's like, what have you really done? Has your deck operated, or was just this one card that fed off the other's value? So that one, my only complaint is why it took so long. You know, it went 3 to 4 years, again, while being promoted as this powerful commander card that, you know, people really wanted to get for their decks, and helped certain strategies, help them excel, like lower power decks excel to meet their pod. But again, it was a very easy decision that could have been done before the value got out of control, before people had a collection of them, and before it was promoted and many other sets after the initial printing. And then lastly, we have Soul Ring. So it says, we should talk about the elephant in the room. We are not banning Soul Ring and have no desire to. Yes, based on the criteria we've talked about here, it should be banned. Soul Ring is the iconic card of the format and significantly tied to the identity of the format that defies the laws of physics in a way that no other card does. Banning Soul Ring would fundamentally change the identity of the format. We aren't trying to eliminate all explosive starts. It happening once in a while is exciting, and that's why they're removing other fast mana options so that it doesn't happen as often. So that's their argument. It is reasonable, you know, if you have less of something that's extremely fast and explosive, mana ramp wise, then players are less likely to draw multiple versions of that, assuming they put that in the deck. That's a big assumption, like I said, with price and power level considerations. But with Soul Ring, you know, it is accessible to everyone. It's in every pre-con, which is ironic. You know, if you think about it, pre-con is meant for the new players to sort of be slowly integrated into the format, and, you know, have these pre-cons as a way to simple strategy, way to sort of understand the game at a slower pace. So yeah, what's ironic about Soul Ring is the fact that, like I said, it's in every pre-con, and it's meant to accelerate the game. So they're saying not to ban it here, which, whether you agree or disagree, that's whatever. But why would you put it in a pre-con that goes against this whole philosophy that Commander has when it comes to being casual, slower pace, in decks that, if someone draws it, for example, one of the 4 players, they're just going to exponentially jump ahead in that game, and it may ultimately be unfun. Again, there's a lot of variables involved. It's hard to predict what happens in any game. If people, again, play removal, there is threat analysis, but apparently fast mana is too fast. Even though I think we all understand it, whoever plays Sol Ring is the immediate threat, at least at that time. So, my opinion when it comes to Sol Ring, you can certainly see it being contradictive that you ban a mana crypt that is relatively the same to Sol Ring in regards to the actual gameplay. One costs 1 mana, the other costs 0, but also deals you 3 life. Has a chance, that is, a 50% chance. But I understand it. You want to keep at least some of it in there, but I would take it out of precons. I don't understand that concept, that mindset. And that's, I guess, the only reason why it is such an iconic card, right? Because it's printed so much. Let's not print it as much and allow players that are new to enjoy the battle cruising commander that this article is preaching. But I will also just point out that I think Mana Crypt is an iconic card. I mean, it's been a household name in this Magic Gathering community for I don't know, 15 years, ever since the beginning of Commander. And to all of a sudden say that is no longer in existence, the value has not plummeted, and people who were a fan of the card had some assets, had financial implications, seem to have been forgotten in a sense. Hopefully CDH will sort of come in and say, hey, we're going to separate ourselves from the rules committee and create our own set of ban lists. I think that would help recoup some of the value, because I think it is a relatively large audience that do like that format. But it is, as of now, there's nothing that has happened, and we're kind of all just stuck wondering why and if there's any way these cards can bounce back. I don't see them reversing course, because I feel like this decision was calculated. I read that it was over a year in the works while I guess the rules committee was discussing it. It happened, and now we live with it and we move on, but it is still disappointing, and I can empathize with those that had more of a financial implication than I did. So that basically sums up my sort of analysis of the situation. I don't necessarily agree with it, I'll be honest. You can probably tell just based on my reactions throughout. I think there's a lot of factors involved when it comes to the gameplay. There's a lot of high variance. I mean, you never really play a game that's the same, right? There's so many different dynamics, so many different decks, commanders, themes. And yes, you're going to have these miserable games. That's just part of the experience. Does this fast mana make it miserable just right away? Again, I don't agree. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of deck-dependent theme that sort of applies and you need to factor in. But I guess the rules committee thinks that this is overall the best going forward for the format. There's certainly arguments to be made that it does create a unhealthy play pattern, I guess, when it comes to the fast mana. But I still like to think that it's meant for us as players to determine what we want to do in our MTG careers, and not someone that's in a room of 5 people discussing, as opposed to just having the audience, the consumers, decide on the future of these cards. There's definitely a lot they can do better going forward. I hope they do, just for the overall longevity of Magic the Gathering, the reputation. We want this whole game to flourish. Obviously, we've enjoyed it for so many years, had so much fun, met so many great people, and to have something like this happen that Again, I don't know how many really complained in the throughout their careers of Magic that these cards were too broken. Obviously Nadu, like I said, and Dockside certainly is the most prevalent that I've seen a little too much. So I can see those being banned, but the other ones definitely more situational. You don't necessarily see them as often. Let me know in the comments about the decision to ban these cards, which ones you agree with, which ones you don't, how you want them to improve going forward as in regards to these announcements, and what is your overall thoughts, enthusiasm going forward after this news dropped. So yeah, thank you all for checking in. Stay deadly.